Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Waterloo Engineering Graduate Studies Alumni Panel. Thank you for making the time to join us today as we welcome 4 alumni from our engineering graduate programs here at the University of Waterloo. My name is Catherine Balzerczak-Wimmer, and I am the Graduate Recruitment Officer within the Faculty of Engineering, and I will be moderating the session today. During this event, our 4 alumni panelists from a cross-section of professional paths will be sharing with us the impact that their graduate degree has had on their careers. Throughout the event, if you have a question for one of our panelists, I encourage you to use the Q&A button within your Zoom screen to submit your question to us. We will also be answering questions that were pre-submitted prior to the event, and we're going to do our best to answer as many questions as time allows. This session is being recorded, and you will be sent a link to the recording as soon as it's ready, so keep an eye on your email. All right, I am pleased to introduce our panelists to you. Please join me in welcoming Erik Wilhelm, the Head of Research for Keyboard Switzerland, Yasmine Shatahiri, Risk Consulting and Decision Support Lead at AECOM, Mark Dredger, Chief Operating Officer at Sandvine, and Anne Robinson, Chief Strategy Officer at Kinaxis. So welcome. I would like to hand it over to our panelists now, and I'd like to ask each of you just to take some time to share with us a little bit about your personal career journey and perhaps the reasons for pursuing a graduate degree in engineering at Waterloo. So if I could ask perhaps Erik, we could start with you, and then we'll hear from Yasmine, Mark, and end it off with Anne.
Great, thanks, Catherine. So my name is Erik Wilhelm, and I went to Waterloo for my undergraduate degree in chemical engineering. I started in 2000 and got into a master's program at Waterloo with an NSERC scholarship in 2005 and finished in 2007. And after that, I went to ETH, which is in Zurich, and did my doctoral work there. I'm sort of let's say a hybrid of various disciplines. At the moment, I could probably best describe my work as a mix of safety and reliability engineering and robotics and control. So it's kind of a nice mix. And after I finished my PhD, I was offered a postdoc position at MIT. Did that for a year and then joined the faculty at a university that MIT was co-founding in Singapore, the SUTD. So I was faculty there for 4.5 years and then moved to Europe with my wife and kids to be closer to her family here, and joined Keyboards. Actually, I had an offer to go to BMW, but thought a boutique EV manufacturer that's been around for 30 years sounded like a pretty cool idea. And so for the past almost 5 years now, I've been working at Keyboards, leading the research team, doing a lot of analytics, a lot of statistics. I actually started in their fleet management department and then moved on to head the research group. So it's been a wild ride. And I guess I kind of, to come back to the topic of this panel on graduate studies, I kind of followed reputation in most of my choices. So I have a friend who once said to me that I went to the MIT of Canada for my master's and undergrad degree, the MIT of Europe for my PhD, and then the MIT of MIT for my postdoc. So that was kind of like what the guiding light there was always related to the reputation of the institutions, because I always found that wonderful and engaging relationships to people around you make the most out of your days. So I think following a reputation is a nice strategy, and it's kind of helped build out my network, and also had lots of interesting experiences in that career path. So yeah, I guess I'll stop there, and thanks again for inviting me to the panel.
Great, thank you for sharing, Erik. Yasmine, let's hear from you.
For sure, yes. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I wanted to start by just giving you a brief overview of who I am and what I do, and I would definitely love to get to some of my experiences at Waterloo as well. So I'm currently ACOM Canada's Risk Consulting and Decision Support Practice Lead. I've actually relocated from New York City back to Canada to create this practice. My company does architecture, engineering, construction, operations, management. So basically whatever you see that's getting built in the way of infrastructures, bridges, facilities, we've had a hand in either building that, designing that, or constructing that in some of the scenarios as well. So in my role, I develop risk management best practices for our project and program management business line, but across other business lines as well, such as nuclear, water, transportation, and other areas as well. And really the goal of our practice is to make sure that we deliver what we promise and we meet the criteria that we've set at the beginning of the project when we started, such as cost, schedule implications, and so on. I wanted to now move on a little bit and talk about why I joined Waterloo and kind of my experience there. So I want to say that I graduated from my master's program in 2014 from Waterloo in civil engineering. And really the main reason of why I picked Waterloo was because of a lot of family experiences that we've had. So my sister has actually obtained her master's and PhD degrees from University of Waterloo, and my father actually did his undergraduate degree many years back. And both of them told me about really the great balance that Waterloo provides in digging deep in the research aspect of a graduate degree, but also the great connections that they make with the industry partners. So it's really a good balance of theoretical knowledge, but also being able to understand who your industry partners are. And then you understand really what your skill sets are in the way of research work, but also working with the industry. So I definitely found that fascinating, and it allowed me to dig deeper in my knowledge and really learn about many different things that Waterloo had to offer. And I think that's definitely one of the best experiences that I've had for sure in my graduate education.
Great, thanks so much for sharing. That's some good insight. Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Nice to participate in today's session. I currently reside in the Dallas area, but I grew up in Brantford, so I was familiar with University of Waterloo in terms of reputation. And really, from my teens, I did a lot of hands-on work with electronics, fixing radios, building things, etc. And so I also wanted to have kind of that co-op hands-on aspect, but really knew that I wanted to have a career in engineering. So I did my undergrad at University of Waterloo, and I just really loved to learn, and I thought that doing a master's would kind of extend that and also ensure that I had challenging work as I started my career. It also helped that, again, I had an NSERC scholarship. I also had a very supportive wife. My wife and I got married before fourth year, so she was a big part in kind of supporting and getting me through the program. I had done my undergraduate work. My upper year was focused on communication systems and digital signal processing, so I kind of continued that thread for my master's, and actually did a fairly short master's. Was at school for 4 terms. I had a job waiting at Bell Northern Research, which later became Nortel, and I started in their group that worked on the very first standards for digital cellular radios back in the 80s. So while I certainly had the kind of the new hire grunt work of being in a lab environment and testing and so forth, but I also in very short order got to do more challenging work. I authored several submissions to the standards bodies on how the standards should be set. Did a lot of work on modeling of radio systems and learning kind of the RF side of things, as well as the DSP encoding side. My master's actually was in an area on what's called equalization. I was able to actually take my thesis, work on it some more, and patent it, and it was actually applied to the product that BNR produced at the time. So that was kind of an added bonus from that. Then after about 10 years in Canada and the R&D side of Nortel, I moved down to the United States into product management. And I've worked for a couple of other companies since that time, including my current role at Sandvine. Done both leading R&D, leading product management functions, as well as a variety of other things, customer support, delivery, manufacturing, IT. So that a fairly diverse degree, but I really always appreciated my time at UW and kind of the start that gave me in my early career.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Mark. Anne, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Fabulous. Thank you. Anne Robinson. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at a company named Kinaxis, and we're based in Ottawa, but it's a global company. I am from the tropical island of Newfoundland, so for any East Coasters out there. And when I started my undergraduate, I applied to 8 different schools in 8 different fields. I don't advise anyone to do that, ranging from music to political science to math. And I eventually landed at Acadia University doing a math degree, which was a perfect fit for me. Small school, and which meant lots of opportunity. It was also a time when 6 of the 7 people doing honors math were all women. So it was a really unique environment to be in. And in my second year, I had the good fortune to attend a conference called What's a Mathematician Like You Doing in a Place Like This? And it was around careers in math. And my friends wanted to be actuaries and high school math teachers. And I just said, you know what, I'll go to the other things to make sure we had sort of all the disciplines covered. And while I was there, I learned about the discipline of operations research, which was the application of math in a business setting from a planning perspective. And I thought, and I was from Newfoundland, I understood the importance of applying your knowledge to whatever was relevant at the time. And I wanted to land in a field that if it was oil and gas, great. If it was tourism, great. If it was retail, great. It didn't actually matter. So I came back excited, spoke to the faculty members, and they said, well, Waterloo is one of the few places right now in Canada that's offering this through their management science discipline. So I explored there. I also looked at UBC and ultimately made the decision to do my degree at Waterloo in management sciences. And made it different from my colleagues here. I came from a really technical math background, and now I was in something that would have been the equivalent of a technical MBA. So I had to read a whole lot more than I had to at any point during my undergraduate degree. I focused on transportation logistics as my primary thing. My work was actually funded by SSHRC, not NSERC, which is interesting in engineering. So that's the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And while I was there, I did focus a lot on the analytics side, but then I met a faculty member who was also interested in the IT side. And he had handed me a piece of paper. It looked like gibberish on it, but it was actually names of companies who were introducing ERP systems. So I date myself by saying that. And I wound up doing research in the application of ERP and its impact on industrial modeling. This interest triggered me to go on to do my PhD, which I wound up doing in California at Stanford University, which was an amazing experience because I got to witness the boom and the bust, probably not unlike some of the things that are happening right now. And through there, as much as I loved being part of the academic community, I made the decision to go into industry. I've worked in places like Cisco Systems, primarily in the supply chain area, which is now a language that everybody is speaking. I spent several years going through almost every discipline there, but really as a supply chain architect, into recreating the level of planning and forecasting capabilities for Cisco, up to leading strategy, moved from the West Coast of the US to the East Coast, and joined Verizon Wireless and started working in the supply chain area, various different roles there, and expanded my career. I had a stint leading the supply chain for Verizon Wireless. So if you were looking for cell phone cases or the latest and greatest iPhones, it would have been my team responsible for that. And about 3 years ago, I moved to Kinaxis. It was a company I'd known my whole career, and realized when I knew that they were Canadian, and serendipitously I had kind of gone from being in the customer seat for Kinaxis to an opportunity to join them. And I'm probably one of the few people, though Mark may be similar, where my academic background I was able to apply in every aspect of my job. And Waterloo was certainly one of the launching points to do that.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Anne. So I see that we are starting to get some questions in, which is great. So I encourage all of our attendees, if you have questions for our panelists, submit them using the Q&A button. You'll find them at the bottom of your Zoom screen. But I would like to start today with a question that we frequently hear from students who are curious sort of about the value that a graduate degree can add to their skill set and experience. So to our panelists, if you could reflect back a little bit, could you share with us some of the skills or knowledge that you learned throughout your graduate degree, whether that's your MASC or your PhD, that you found really useful sort of as your career progressed? If we could hear from perhaps Mark and then Yasmine, and then we'll loop back to Erik and Anne.
Sure. So I think, one thing obviously kind of transitioned from more of a directed to more of an independent, environment with the, master's program. So I think that was very, useful as I started my career to be able to, kind of work and plan and think independently, know how to use, the literature and, where to go to, to find answers to questions. So I think that was, a component of it. From a technical side, several of the things I learned around how to, model systems and analyze systems was also, very relevant to my early career there.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing, Mark. Yasmine, would you like to go next?
Absolutely, yes. So my Master's of Applied Science degree was in civil engineering, and I think I learned a great deal about research because just transitioning from undergrad to a graduate degree, I think you get a bit lost when you try to dig deeper and just get comfortable with not knowing. But I remember during one of our first research training courses, the instructor actually drew a circle on the board, and they said, with a master's degree, you're working somewhere within the boundaries of knowledge. And with a PhD degree, which I did afterwards, you're going to be making a very small little dent. And I think we forget that in that body of knowledge. So the dent is not huge. And I think the biggest thing that I learned was to learn to solve and scaffold complex engineering problems and go about solving them. So of course, the technical knowledge was fantastic, but I think what you really take away is how to go about solving unknown problems and get comfortable with doing that. And that was very valuable to me.
Great, thank you. Erik, and then perhaps Anne, if you have anything to add.
Where to start? I think the experiences that I gained at Waterloo and in graduate programs in general were extremely formative. It's hard to really pinpoint particular examples, but I can maybe think of a few for this panel. So I was engaged with the Challenge X team. So we were working on building a fuel cell hybrid vehicle, and that was really the main focus of my master's thesis under Dr. Fowler's supervision. And so that project had extreme time pressure and was technically quite ambitious. And so I think that one thing that I can really look back to my master's degree at Waterloo and be thankful for is the ability to work hard under pressure. And actually, just this week, I've managed to sort of refresh those skills as well, since I've been in the equivalent of the UOF team's garage in Switzerland. It's gotten rather chilly, and 5 a.m. mornings programming our autonomous vehicle for the big demo it's got to give at the Transport Expo next week. So, actually, just before this session, I was out there in the fields. Training our robot car to drive itself and thinking back on those days. So it's very poignant and timely to sit here and explain how those memories helped. So that's, I think, one big thing that the graduate degree gave to me is that in the face of very difficult challenges, there's always a solution. A lot of times it's a requirement to be creative, as it is now as it was then. Also a lot of grunt work. So work ethic.
Excellent. Anne, over to you.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add and to acknowledge my colleagues here is you certainly learn how to learn, and that's really important, right? How to do independent research, how to learn. So any problem you're tackled with in the future, you have the skills to figure it out. The other thing you learn, at least I did through my master's program, which was not necessarily part of my undergraduate, was this ability to work in teams the best teams you'll ever have are the ones you're going to have in school, because you're thinking very similarly. You're all super smart, particularly if you're at Waterloo, and they're really solid. So you learn how to work together, and not like, oh, we each did a piece, we bring it together, we glue it. Like, that's not useful. How do you become a good team member? And I feel like I had a lot more opportunities and experiences to do that at Waterloo than my counterparts who had similar education paths in the US, whose the master's degrees aren't necessarily as research intensive or as sort of teamwork partnership intensive. And I really valued those skills. In fact, that became one of my prime interview skills as I was building teams in the future. I let my team figure out, do you know your math? Do you have all those skills? I would ask them specifically, what makes you a good team member? And give me an example. And these are all people all drawing from their university experiences.
Great, that's excellent insight. Thank you. So we have a question coming in from one of our attendees, and I know it was also submitted prior to the event as well. So we have some people who are wondering your opinion on doing graduate school right after you finish your undergrad, or perhaps if there's value in getting some experience in industry and then pursuing a graduate degree. So I'm gonna leave it open. If any of our panelists would like to chime in on that one, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Anne.
I was just going to say, it could go either way, really. You have some momentum. I didn't feel like my math degree where I was ready to go and start working in a field that was relevant. I probably would have been fine, but I didn't feel like I quite had the skills. So I decided I would continue on. But when I was in the class, one of the part of the curriculum for management sciences is organizational behavior. And I took these classes, and they didn't mean a heck of a lot to me. And if I had actually been in industry and known about organizational dynamics as I do now, that class would have been a lot more relevant. I don't regret it. I went right through, but I did make sure I intertwined it with enough application that I could put it in the context of the real world.
Yeah, I would maybe kind of echo that momentum comment. I think, you're kind of in the thick of it. You've got all this knowledge in your head, and that does tend to, maybe either dissipate or become more focused as you graduate and kind of narrow your scope. So I think there was a lot to begin just by, kind of continuing that momentum. One comment, I think if I was to do more of a business focused graduate program at MBA, I would probably personally just recommend to do that later in your career when you've got some of that experience. You can kind of see how it all fits together. I didn't personally do that. I was fortunate during probably 7-8 years to be with a company, Danaher, that had a very, very structured approach to business, and it was kind of my my real life MBA as opposed to going back to school. But definitely having the experience in the industry, I think, is an asset there.
Maybe I'd just throw into the mix there that serendipity often plays roles in these decisions, and I would also sort of encourage prospective graduate students to look for a project as well that interests them and they can augment their knowledge. In general, though, I'd say I'd probably do what I did again, which is just to sort of continue on through all the degrees. Particularly with funneling into an academic career to start off with, and I'd say there are great things to be learned in industry as well as academia, but I'd really make the decision contingent on what kind of a project you can get at Waterloo, and there are great options, I believe, still.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing. I think I definitely agree with what everyone's saying here. I think most of us on this panel have had really the privilege of being funded by either NSERC or the US version of it, which I was funded when I moved to the US. So hopefully you're not having to worry about financial burdens and having to pay for your own master's program or for your own PhD program. Sometimes we see outside of Canada. And if that's not the case, I think it's really a personal decision to see if you want to gain some experience beforehand. But I definitely recommend to do it when you're fresh. I've had colleagues in my graduate program that were in various stages of their life. And I think when you have more time to spend on research and you have less commitment in the way of life and work and so on, it make so much of a better program, but I think it definitely matters on your financial situation and if there's funding available when you're trying to move into graduate school. As Erik mentioned, finding projects is great because then you can find hopefully a funding source to rely on as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We have a question that's come in, and it's specifically for you, Erik. So I'm going to direct this one to you. How did you pivot from chemical engineering to a more tech-based PhD and career?
Well, you know, it's a really interesting question. I thought about that also before joining the panel. But basically, I would say it comes back to some comments that Anne made earlier, that it's you know, it's the real value of a graduate studies degree is to let you experience learning and really hone your learning skills. And so when I taught in Singapore, actually MIT kind of destroyed traditional columns for this new university. They basically said there's no more chemical or, you know, electrical engineering. There's kind of these focuses, these clusters. So I was in the engineering product development pillar, in fact. And I think that's a pretty extreme example of what you see, though, cross-cutting industry and academia, these tendencies to sort of follow the needs and skills that are required. And so I guess how I personally did it, well, I was accepted to U of T, McGill, and one other school I can't recall right now, for an electrical engineering program. And my you know, my inclination was always towards electrical and control engineering, but you know, I got offered a position in Chem Eng at Waterloo. I thought, you know, let's give this a crack, and it turned out I was in a cohort of people, and that's also really important. You know, building on the idea of teams, I was in a cohort of people. Turns out we all had very similar backgrounds. So we were actually, I think, 3 chemical engineers in the lab that I was in that were all more probably classically defined as controls engineers. And basically, yeah, what I'd round off by saying is that it's really just important that you strengthen your process to approaching problems, right? It's all based on math. It's all based on the same fundamental physical principles of our universe. And if you can learn how to navigate those, then you'll be successful no matter what, you know, word stands on your degree.
Great, thank you, Erik. We have a few attendees who are wondering, when you were considering your graduate program, did you already know the field or the area that you wanted to study in, or where your research would focus? How did you define that? How did you sort of approach the idea of finding a research topic? Perhaps we can start with Anne and then head over to Yasmine.
No, I didn't, because I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into. I knew the field. I was excited to start participating in the discipline. And I had a faculty member reach out to me actually who said, you know, I've got this grant. This is the area we're focused in. And it was on the impact of NAFTA was what ultimately the grant was for, and sort of the micro effects of NAFTA. And I was intrigued. And so we spoke on the phone, and it sounded like there could be the exact problem I didn't know. Once we started talking, we figured it out together. So relying on expert opinion and somebody who's sort of in the crux of it, who knows where the funding is, what's available. And you know, it's you want to learn things. Maybe it's not the perfect problem, but there's certainly aspects of the problem that you're going to figure out along the way. So to be being flexible enough to try something, learn the techniques, learn how to set up the problem, learn how to draw it to some kind of conclusion, and what value and practice that might have, sort of that holistic approach. That was really, it was his guidance that led me to the exact topic.
Thanks, Anne. Yasmine, would you like to share your experience?
For sure, yes. Well, I remember when I finished my undergraduate studies, I knew I wanted to learn more. I knew I didn't want to go to the industry right away. So that's why I decided to do a master's program. But I remember speaking to every professor. Well, I already picked University of Waterloo as my to-go university. And I didn't want to commit to anything in civil engineering. So I was speaking to every single professor in the department, hoping, I'm sure they speak to each other at one point, which was not the best thing, but looking back at it, I really wanted to learn about their research. So I looked all of them up, read their papers, put together a little table that kind of ranked what I liked and what their research areas were. I think one very important thing that Anne mentioned, maybe you'll end up deciding on a certain topic or a certain area, and a number of years after, when you graduate, you think that it's not the best decision that you could have made at that point. I think the most important thing is to learn how to package and tailor your knowledge to the industry that you're wanting to transition to, which is that learning mindset and kind of picking bits and pieces of what you've learned. I think for me, it worked out quite well because after all of my rounds of interviews with the professors, I knew I wanted to do construction engineering and management because I liked more big picture work than designing and kind of the detailed work that civil engineers end up doing. So I would say, do your research, go and read the profiles of the professors and their work. And if it doesn't work out at the end, it's still going to be okay, because you can definitely tailor what you've learned to the industry that you're wanting to transition to.
Thank you. Mark, if we could hear from you, and then we'll hand it over to Erik.
Yeah, sure. So I think, a factor in mine was certainly the fact that I, knew my thesis supervisor as an undergrad and had a number of courses with him, and they're just kind of that relationship. In terms of the actual project, I would say it goes back to more, I think, something that Erik said, just around, interest and passion. I was, really interested in this whole subject area. Communications as a field was also, growing. So I knew there was an industry, pull for that. So I would say it was more, grounded out of areas I was interested in and intrigued by.
Yeah, for me, it's a short answer. I was already strongly engaged with the UOF team, really technically and emotionally invested already through my undergrad years. I've been with the team already for, I think, 3.5 years by the time it came around to deciding on a master's. And so, of course, I found a nice project on hardware in the loop control engineering within the framework of the chemical engineering department. So it was, again, this mixing of boundaries and borders, but it was lovely, and very supportive supervisor as well, who I still have a warm relationship with. Dr. Fowler helped a lot, and he said, "We're going to get you a scholarship. Don't worry, we'll get you." So it was quite good.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. We are getting some questions around sort of career outcomes. So I was wondering if we could have our panelists just sort of chat towards your knowledge of, are there careers within your field that perhaps require a graduate degree? And when you were looking for jobs after you were done your graduate programs, did you ever run into sort of the stigma that you're sort of overqualified for positions because of your graduate degree? Perhaps, Mark, we could start with you.
Sure. So in terms of the first role, I didn't really run into that. I think I don't recall whether the job posting had a hard requirement for a master's, but it was certainly viewed as an asset, particularly in the field that I had studied. So it was a good match from that perspective. If I kind of look at the industry, in the company that I'm in today, Sandvine is a company that works in the telecom software area around an area called application and network intelligence. A big part of what we do is based on techniques using machine language and artificial intelligence and big data, various things of that nature. That's definitely an area where master's degrees or PhD degrees are very useful in the industry. That field is just changing so rapidly that the need for people with a lot of depth and breadth in that is very critical, and so those are very highly valued in the industry.
Thanks, Mark. Erik, could we hear from you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just pass on some advice to the attendees that my father once gave me, actually, and that is to try and come up with a skill set for yourself, which kind of ages well. And then, so of course, it's always a challenge when you're looking at a job in the tech sector, right? Everything's always changing. That's the nature of the beast. So, I would say that it's always good to have sort of a strong emphasis on fundamental topics. So instead of, trying to get a job title that has something like, data scientist, and I can make fun of myself actually, because I've had that title. If I could do it again, I would have just, said statistics, that kind of thing. So, I think that's my biggest piece of advice for a graduate, prospective graduate student in engineering, is to kind of look at where the puck is going to be rather than where it is.
Great advice. Anne, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so I'm not sure that I've ever put out a job posting where I didn't say master's degree preferred. So I don't think having a master's degree is necessarily going to disqualify you from being overqualified for a role. I mean, if you come in, and I see this maybe more with MBAs than necessarily a master's of engineering, like, what am I going to lead? What am I going to take big project am I going to have tomorrow? Okay, look, cool your jets. You're coming in, you still need the opportunity to learn the environment, learn the business, right? And you will very quickly prove your worth and what you're able to the magnitude of the project you're able to tackle. Now, I would say PhD, I had a slightly different experience because you have twofold. You either are perceived of knowing everything, like you are on top of it for your field and you've got it, or you have been in school too long and you don't know anything. And those dynamics may come up in the hiring, but probably if you're interviewing for a job, they already understand sort of the beast that you are. But once you get into a company, you're likely to encounter both of those perspectives from the other employees in the organization. And I certainly had a lot of that. I was one of maybe two who were in the supply chain manufacturing area of Cisco when I started, who had PhDs. And we were really an anomaly to the typical type of employee at the time that was hired. Now it's a very different landscape, and certainly the profession of supply chain has evolved a lot. But I did encounter a lot of that as I got started. What I would say, one compliment to your skill set is to make sure that you focus on your communication skills and being able to read your audience and understand. Don't oversell yourself, but ask enough questions to show that you're engaged. Learn how to contextualize your work. I'm sure you've made the fanciest engineering discoveries and have done the coolest math, but quite frankly, a lot of employers do not care. They want to know what the value is of the outcome that you've created, and being able to articulate in that kind of language is really important. And then I go back to teamwork, right? You were coming in to be a team member, so articulating why you would be a good team member and not just a leader, which I know I'm positive everybody on this call has that impetus to want to be a leader of their domain, but also what makes you a good team member. And that will make you really attractive to anybody that you're looking to seek a job from.
Excellent. That's some really great tangible advice to take away. Thanks, Anne. Yasmine, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would have said 100% of what Anne is saying. I agree with. I remember after my master's degree at Waterloo, although our center, I think it was called Tatum Center, that helped with resumes and elevator pitches and all of that. They helped me a whole lot with putting together my resume and finding jobs that actually worked. I wasn't very successful in transitioning to the industry at that point. I think civil engineers in nature, they're meant to do practical work. So construction workers, you're on the site, you're building something. You do need a degree to be able to build structures, but higher education is not something that was valued many years back. Now it's getting much, much better. I think after my PhD, it became even harder to make that transition, especially since I had spent many years with research and with the National Science Foundation and with NSERC and so on. But I think the most important thing that I had to do was learn to translate what I had done to benefits to the industry. So forget about the mechanical details of what you did and the heavy lifting parts of your model, but talk about the benefits of what you created and how that's going to benefit the society. And I think be open to learning, right? Because with a PhD degree, it doesn't mean that you're going to get a director position or some sort of a high-end role because you have that PhD. That means you're probably going to get there much faster, hopefully. But I think it's just be eager to learn appreciate what you have and don't get upset right off the bat if someone's saying, well, with a PhD, you know just as much as someone with a bachelor's degree in the industry because you haven't ever been to an actual site. In my case, a construction site or civil engineering work. So that'll be my advice.
Great insight. Thank you. All right. So we have some of our attendees who are wondering, why did you choose Waterloo for your graduate school instead of other institutions where perhaps you also received an offer from? If we could start, let's start with Erik and then we'll head over to Anne.
Oh, why Waterloo? Well, yeah, I think that's a pretty easy one. You know, I think with the benefit of hindsight, you know, I've been, as you heard me already describe, through a number of institutions of higher learning. And, you know, there are a lot of smart people in these places. But I think what's really special about Waterloo is sort of the character of the university that's been nurtured. And I think that, you know, it's not a given that smart people are also going to be kind and generous and pleasant people to work with and to form teams with, which is certainly, you know, not the case at Waterloo. Waterloo, I've always found supporting environments, no matter what project I was working on. The cohort that I was in was excellent, but also cohorts that we were with in other departments were equally as good. So I just think that for me, that's the sort of the primary reason is that, you know, there are a lot of really smart people out there, but it takes, you know, a special culture and a spirit of what if. I like that marketing campaign a few years ago to build something like Waterloo, and I think that reflects itself clearly in the reputation it has.
Yeah, I didn't do my undergraduate at Waterloo, so I don't know that I had necessarily the magic that Erik speaks to, but I do appreciate the word reputation. You know, coming from the undergraduate school that I did, we had a really strong alumni network, and Waterloo also has a really strong alumni network. And if you think about, you know, what are the things that allow you to catapult your career? Well, the power of your network is really a big one. And I was aware of that. Now, like I mentioned before, there weren't a lot of options when what I was looking for: operations research. There was, you know, UNC in the States, but wow, did you have to put a lot of money in a bank account to prove that you could even be a Canadian and go down to the US? And there was a lot of drama with that. There was a program at UBC that I did consider, but I was from Newfoundland. That was awfully far away. My father had gone for a short time to Waterloo, so I knew about it. And I was considering other random things. I even considered going to law school. I did do the LSATs and then said, oh, I don't want to be with those people. Let me find something a little more applied to do. So as I went through sort of my decision criteria around funding availability, reputation, strength of the alumni network, and interesting problems that were already available to me, Waterloo was a nice confluence of all of those and made the decision really easy ultimately.
Thanks, Anne. Why don't we head over to Mark and then Yasmine?
Sure. So I think, you know, obviously I did my undergrad at Waterloo, so I think, you know, it was a known commodity. I had a good network of friends there. I had experience with the faculty, including, you know, my advisors. So I think those were probably some of the main reasons. You know, and just the quality and reputation of the experience. It was kind of, you know, things are good here, so, you know, why go through the hassle of looking elsewhere?
And Yasmine, would you like to share your experience as well?
For sure, yes. Well, I think for me, as I mentioned, I had my father's experience from many, many years back since he did his undergrad at Waterloo, but my sister with 2 degrees there. I didn't do my undergraduate studies at Waterloo, but I definitely knew about the reputation. And if I were to say one thing, and I think if you know Waterloo, you know about this, that it's about innovation, innovation, innovation. And I think that's very important. But innovation by itself, I don't think it adds much value to your career and to your program if you don't have the right industry connections. So I think the biggest value that Waterloo has that made me pick it over other graduate institutions was how they're able to provide really good, deep research for you to do. And it's not just about the professors, it's about the courses, it's about different types of certificates that you can get with teaching and with presentation, but also having that industry connection so that you can understand how you can apply what you learn to the industry. I think for me, that was definitely my #1 reason for picking UW for sure.
Excellent, well said. So as you know, we have a large number of attendees here today who are just finishing their undergraduate degree. So to our panelists, if you could think back, we'd love to hear a little bit about your thoughts and perspective on that transition from your undergraduate degree into graduate studies. Specifically, if you did, or if you sort of pivoted your focus from what your undergrad study was in, that would be useful for our attendees to learn about. So perhaps, Erik, we could start with you and then we'll head over to Anne.
Sure, thanks. I mean, it was, you know, it was quite a linear transition, I would say. The big differences, of course, are that you're in the master's program, you have substantially more freedom to structure your time and choose the courses that augment your needs. You also kind of have a freedom and latitude in the research sense, which takes some adjusting to. But I think that if you're predisposed to graduate studies, in any case, that's something that you're going to sort of thrive in. It was also nice having an office, equipment that you could use without having to get a TA to open a door for you. Keys and so on to the buildings. That was great. So you could, instead of working from 8 to 6, you could work from 7 to 11. So that's all kind of experiences that I had.
Erik, you should have gone to a small school. I had an office from all of this, my second year onwards, and keys to the building and all that good stuff.
I'm heading to Acadia next.
It was beautiful. It's an amazing school. Highly recommend. When I went from a technical degree, I was taking, real analysis and optimization and all these like heavy math courses, but not necessarily case-based learning and things that you might associate more with maybe an MBA, but the management sciences program is really a holistic approach to that discipline. And so I went from this full mathematical course load to some math, but some putting that math in context, learning about technology. I did 3 classes in my first year of my graduate program, and it kicked my behind. Like, there was so much work to do. We were all experiencing it, but that level of freedom that Erik spoke to, you are the master of your own domain. But the work is different. It's a different level. There's a different expectation. At least 50% of the class were coming back into, like, were professionals who were working, who were coming back to school. So they had a different expectation, and it was a challenge. The other thing I had mentioned before, I was one of 7 with 6 women who are in this math program, and I came into a male-dominated university in a male-dominated field, and that was a real shift for me as well. So having to navigate sort of this gender shift, which I realize is not as bad as it was then, but is still a challenge. The level of independence and the different type of work, I was really grateful that my group who were also taking this, we were all in it together, and people brought different strengths. So my mathematical prowess, along with somebody who might have been coming more for the management of technology side of things, we're able to bring that together and really conquer the program together. And again, it goes back to the power of teamwork to be able to accomplish something at a different level.
Great, thank you. Yasmine, would you be open to sharing your experience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I did all of my school back to back. So my transition wasn't like I had gone to work and I came back. So I was very fresh from my undergrad study when I started my master's. I think Erik mentioned the keys and the office, and all of that is great, just because now we have a space to work in, and you have colleagues that are in that office with you, and now you have a professor that's giving you his or her full attention as you're going through your research. But I think for me, one of the hardest things that I had to deal with was going from more of a course-based curriculum that I had experience. Of course, we did some open-ended courses where we had to kind of solve an engineering problem or build something, but it was really very short term. So you had this one course and one commitment from having one large commitment over 2 years. So I think what I had to learn was to make myself responsible for my own internal deliverables with myself, because you can't turn in a dissertation in 1 week, although you think you can do that, but really you have to start from day one. And I remember, if my advisor would have heard this, I'm sure he knew, but during my first year, I was still learning about what to do and how to write things and how to cite papers and how to find the right papers to read even, which there was a great introductory course at Waterloo that actually introduces you to the basics of research. But I think my struggle was having to do research on my own on open-ended problems and really just relying on my advisor for support, but he's not going to be carrying your workload for you. So I think that was the hardest thing for me, learning that you can't put together a dissertation in a month. It needs the 2 years. So that's definitely my advice that I would like to give.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Mark, do you have any thoughts on sort of the transition from undergrad into a graduate program?
Yeah, sure. So I echo a lot of what was said, but I think one of the bigger changes was, working independently and having to plan over a longer time frame. As far as the independent work, I mean, I had taken a couple of directed studies classes in the English faculty, so class sizes of 2. So that was a little bit, more of a transition or preparation for working more independently. But I also had about halfway, or after 2 terms, I had a job offer, which was great. I accepted it, but it had a fixed start date, after another 2 terms. So I kind of had to really organize my work well. It was nice having an office. My first office was a copper mesh Faraday cage, which was nice and private, but had the disadvantage it could be locked from the outside. So that game was played more than a few times. And then maybe one of the other things, I also, in addition to the engineering courses, I took a graduate math course as part of the program. And that was a very large transition. All this stuff that was perfectly obvious and proven as an engineer, it was completely different methodology and approach in math. So that was probably one of the more difficult, components, although it wasn't, the entire program.
Great, thank you. So we've just sort of heard your experiences sort of at the beginning of starting a graduate program and the transition there. So let's take a step back, and if we look at sort of where you are right now, if you had to do it all over again, is there something you would do differently? Yasmine, if we could start with you.
Yes, for sure. I think, my master's degree was very research focused. And I just think if I were to go back, I would just try to dig a bit deeper in the basics and foundations of research at the beginning. That for sure, I think is very important. And just to go in and explore the different opportunities that the graduate school also provides. So don't be in your own little shell in your office or in your lab, but there's so many training courses on presentation skills and learning your personality type and all of that skill sets that you need to learn. So you're a little bit lost at the beginning. That's the nature of research, but try to pick yourself up, learn about the foundations of knowledge, get your research going, use your advisor to the best of your abilities. I mean, their knowledge is great. Make sure you make use of that. And it goes by really fast. So I would definitely try my best to stress less. That's for sure.
Great. Anne, would you like to share with us?
Yeah, I'm not sure I would do anything differently. Every one of my academic experiences really enriched who I am as a person and helped me on my path. I mean, you could always make different choices, but you don't want to necessarily second guess. So I'd say enjoy your path, realize you can pivot. You're not locked in. Your career path could take many swings along the way. It's about acquiring as many experiences and as many skills and, learn the depth of your craft, but partner it, like Yasmine said, with, the ability to speak, the curiosity to learn, that ability to be a hybrid. All those things are important, but remember, at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you're happy. And that's probably the number one thing ultimately.
What about you, Mark? Is there anything that you would perhaps do differently?
I'm kind of with Anne. I don't think on a macro level I would do much differently. At the time I was in school, I would say there was much less focus on a lot of the team-oriented activities and the other kind of non-technical skill building. So it would have been nice to have more of that. To some extent, the co-op terms compensated for that a little bit because you're working in a company and having to collaborate with other people to get things done. But it would have been nice to have more opportunities there.
And Erik, any insight from your end?
Yeah, I guess where I would decide to go to grad school, I wouldn't change. But I think one thing that I learned even as I was in my graduate programs from the master's on is that it's always nice to forge strong links to practitioners when you're in an academic environment. Because oftentimes it's useful to acknowledge the pedagogical nature of your work, right? You're training yourself. You're making these experiences. Yasmine brought up the nice example with the master's and the PhD differences in contributing to the body of knowledge. And I think that it's also important, or I would have probably like to have made stronger links to people who were applying the theories that we were really developing and learning for ourselves and applying in small ways. But I would advise, or I would kind of, if I could do it all again, I would make sure I looked for who was leading the fields in the areas that I was working in an industrial context, and worked more closely with them.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so we are getting close to the end of our session today, but before we wrap things up, I would like to ask each panelist to leave us with their top 2 to 3 tips for those who are considering a graduate degree in engineering at Waterloo. So if we could start with Mark, and then we'll move over to Yasmine, Erik, and then we'll end with you, Anne.
Sure. So I think one of the things I would say is look for something that really interests you and that you're passionate about in terms of a thesis and area of study. I think that's very relevant. As far as the school, I would definitely recommend University of Waterloo. There's a lot of great schools out there, obviously, but I think the faculty and certainly the many investments and kind of improvements that have happened since I was at Waterloo just are really impressive from my perspective. And then I think having a bit of a thought, as Erik mentioned, to how does this work apply to industry. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily be too planful about that, if I can use that term. But I think you want to be thinking about and trying to build relationships and ideas around how am I going to take what I'm learning, and apply both that ability to learn as well as some of what I'm learning, to your career path.
Great, thank you for sharing, Mark. Yasmine, let's hear your tips for students considering a graduate degree.
For sure. I think my first tip is to keep in mind that careers can be very fluid, especially in our day and age. And I think pick a program that can be expandable and applicable to various industries. In my opinion, that's the best way to navigate your career. And my second point would be, in my opinion, Waterloo definitely gives you the best mix of innovation in your field, but also the industry practice. You will have a solid foundation of a knowledge base to rely on, and also really the innovative mindset to be able to think outside the box and tackle research problems. And I think I always get the question of why should I pursue a graduate degree? I think the most important reason is if you're eager to learn and push the boundaries of knowledge then of what's typical in your field, graduate degree is definitely a good way to go for you.
Great, thank you very much. Erik, would you be willing to share some tips with our attendees today?
Yeah, I mean, just sort of really briefly touching on some of the topics we've heard already from this interesting panel. I mean, I think that building out your network is critical in graduate studies. So I firmly believe that's sort of in addition to, of course, the technical experience that you're having it with really curious and interested people. And so really capitalize on that while you're working. So try to be cross-disciplinary, try to engage with other people who are in their graduate studies programs in different topics. That's just going to help you. I think, it's important to also acknowledge the kind of the role that your own motivation plays when you're pursuing graduate studies. So I think, it's really important to do some soul searching and ask yourself, where would you like to end up in not just 4 years or 14 years, but 40 years? And how is this degree, this investment in time going to impact that? Because it is opportunity cost, right? You are making a decision which is costing you money and time. And so I think that's important. And finally, I think, building on maybe to use Mark's experience as an analogy, if you're going to be locked in a Faraday's cage with some people, it better be with people at Waterloo, right? So that's my last tip.
Thanks, Erik. Anne?
It's probably not a lot to add from what my colleagues have said here, but as you're exploring a program at a school, right? You're not just looking at the school, you're looking at a particular program. Maybe do a little research on the alums who've come out of that program, any in the news type publications, or if anybody's been quoted. And if you have the opportunity, meet some of the current students. And if these people, if you're resonating with what you're hearing, or you're excited to be around those people and what they're talking about, then it's probably a good fit for you. But you do need to be curious. You do need to be okay with some level of ambiguity, and you do have to have that fire in the belly, because you're not cramming the thesis in a month. You do need to focus to get it done. And it's a really satisfying experience. It can absolutely add to your superpowers and make you a lot more attractive to whatever career path you want to accomplish. But I know it's a big decision, so I wish all of you best of luck.
Great, that was well said. Thank you. So that does put us at the end of our session for today. And I'd like to extend a really big thank you to our panelists for making the time to join us today, sharing your insight, sharing your experiences around the impact that your graduate degree has had on your career path. And to all of our attendees here today, thank you so much for your participation. And we look forward to welcoming you to Waterloo Engineering in the near future. Thank you, everyone.